Thank you so much, Abby, for sharing your story. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Persist series, episode 2 for 2021, Know Your Roots and Branch Out. I am Vanessa Raquel-Raponi, and so excited to be here today with two fantastic women who are going to share some really interesting insights for you all. As you all know, yesterday was International Women's Day, but I'm sure we all agree that International Women's Day should be every single day. Can I get an amen up in here? A little bit about me, if you haven't heard about who is Vanessa Raquel-Raponi. I am the founder of a not-for-profit organization called EduCareers Canada, which largely targets university students from coast to coast in 30 schools in 9 provinces. And these days I create toys for a living. So I'm a product development engineer at Spin Master, which is a Canadian-founded international toy company. And we created Paw Patrol, if you've ever heard of it, and recently acquired Rubik's Cube, actually. So we're a pretty big player in the toy industry, and happy to answer any questions you may have on that. And lately, I've also been adding the title of YouTuber to my intro. I've started a YouTube channel. You can check it out at Vanessa Raquel-Raponi, where I talk about life advice and stories from the perspective of a queer woman of color. So with that, I want to pass it over to Abby, who's also going to introduce you to our second speaker, Lori. Abby, I just want to hear how did it feel to hear that, and how are you feeling?
Hi, Vanessa. Thanks for having me. No, it feels great. Gosh, it was a while ago. I filmed that, and not a while ago. I think it was maybe a month ago. And it was a great opportunity. I was glad to be able to speak, and I feel good to be here. I'm glad to be here. There is a special surprise that we do have for participants, and an additional guest joining for this session is Lori Fremin. I am so excited to introduce her. When I was approached about speaking at this, and you talk about how do women in engineering persevere, and we had this opportunity to do Q&A. One person that came to mind for me was Lori. She is a senior leader at Shell that I think has done a tremendous job in this area in terms of supporting other women in engineering persevere. I started in Shell almost 20 years ago. So I know Lori from about 20 years ago when I started. Without saying much more, I'm going to pass this on to Lori to introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Lori Freeman, and I have worked for Shell for 28 years. I've been very fortunate to be able to do so. I started in chemicals, Shell Chemicals, in a chemical plant in Geismar, Louisiana, and spent 4.5 years there, and the rest of my career upstream. I've worked in plants, I've worked offshore in the shelf assets and in the deep water assets. I was able to spend a little bit of time because I'm married and I have 3 children. And when my children were very young, from 0 to 4 years of age, I was very fortunate. I had a leader in Shell who believed in me and sent me on short-term international assignments. So I was able to spend a significant amount of time in Aberdeen, Scotland with the Northern Business Unit for a company called Expro, which Shell was one of the main operators for. I was also able to spend time in the Netherlands, The Hague, and then also head off to run a couple efforts in Perth, Australia. So again, very fortunate to have had some just incredible female leaders, actually, and male leaders over 25 years ago really give me these opportunities. So as part of my introduction, I would like to say that this session, when Abby had asked about whether I'd like to help, and I read the background on Persist, to be honest, Persist, if I could summarize 28 years in the industry, it comes with the word persist or persistence. So what an incredible name for this series.
100%. I could not agree more. For episode 1, I brought my colleagues onto the show, and we got to talk about what it's like to have female engineering leadership at the director and VP level, and at my level, the professional level. So I agree. This has just been a wonderful thing that Discovery and Do Goodery have been doing. But I'm sure the audience is now sufficiently convinced that both of you are incredible human beings and to have been chomping at the bit with some questions. So let's dive in, shall we? The first one is about technical knowledge. So how did you find that you maintained your technical knowledge and aptitude with the transition away from a technical position?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think as a technical professional, it's important to build your technical credibility. So for me, the first 10 years of my career when I started in Shell was purely in technical roles. I took on technical roles with increasing responsibility. And after 10 years, I branched out into some of these broadened roles. So I already had the foundation, right? And as you think about over the years, the tools will evolve. There will be more sophisticated and complex tools, and you may not know how to use the latest tool. I mean, these days engineers are coming out of school coding already, right? And I'm like, that was not what I did. But I still had the foundation of that technical knowledge in my discipline. So when I branched out for some time, coming back into that technical discipline wasn't as difficult for me because I already had that 10-year background behind me. And actually, that's exactly what happened for me. I spent 7 years in broadening assignments, 3 in this HR role that was the global skill manager role at the time in The Hague, and 4 in the learning organization. And even though the learning role was a broadening role, it was a learning role that was in my technical discipline. So it actually allowed me the opportunity to hone my skills even further in that discipline. Right. Because for you to actually teach someone else about it, you have to kind of know what you're talking about.
Just a little bit.
So that also kind of kept me connected with my discipline. And when I came back into a technical role again as a team lead for a technical team, it was back really in technical again, and where I actually had to get certified in the specific expertise area. And I will know, I think it was coming back into it and getting that certification in this specific technical area. It took me a bit longer to get there, but you kind of had to understand what is critical for me to know and understand to be successful in this role. And that was one aspect of it. And so I had to just kind of hunker down and do that. And because it was also a role with more responsibility, I wasn't the one actually running the programs, the software. You have a team that's working with you. And this is where you lean on the technical knowledge you have and the broadening you maybe have gotten into more to help with maybe your leadership style and in that respect, because here it's delivering through others, right? So it's about how do you provide that guidance? How do you ask the right questions? How do you probe more to make sure that for a project, at the end of the day, you get the desired outcome that you're looking for.
100%. I think that's so insightful that, having that team in it, you personally are not going to be the one running all the math equations, simulations, whatever it might be in anyone's respective industry. But I know that for me as a materials engineer, getting to be more in leadership roles or industry advising for capstone projects, you can find that balance of just knowing the bigger picture, that exactly as you phrase it, knowing the right questions to ask, I think is so important. Lori, do you have anything to expand or add?
Yeah, I was just going to speak to, I believe there are some students on this call. And so I just wanted to kind of speak to a broader audience and just to complement what Abi had said. One of the things I've learned, and I'm sure many of the folks on this call have learned it through this last 12 months, is I believe to stay technical, even with the broadening assignments I've had as well. One of the things that I think that has kept me going is I'm like always curious, right? So if you're in grade school or secondary school or in college, just think through all of the things wherever you're sitting right now. Look around you and look at everything and just be curious, like, how does that work, right? How does this Wi-Fi work? How did that lamp get made? How is this candle made? How am I talking on this Zoom call right now? And just stay curious, because that's what's kept me motivated. I've learned that I as I learn more, that I need to learn more, if that makes sense, right? And in a world where there's data and information all around us, the power of knowing is not as impactful as the power of learning. And so
Mm-hmm.
that is one kind of tidbit I would say, throughout your career, just like Abby's done, right? Even through broadening assignments, stay curious and get involved and ask questions and make it part of your role in life, to learn. And if you're continuously learning and continuously adapting, you will actually add more and help this world out from our viewpoint, from an energy standpoint. I hope that
Of
helps.
course, I'm so relieved to hear I'm not the only one who's always questioning how everything is made. And it's interesting you mentioned lifelong learning, because in Canada, lifelong learning is explicitly one of the 12 attributes of an engineer. So there you go. We hear, you've heard it here first. So thank you, Mary, for that fantastic question. Next up, we have a really interesting one. So what do you feel drove your decision to move from a technical engineering role to more non-technical roles whether it's in HR, learning, what have you? Was it related to feeling not valued or represented? Was that any sort of, did that play a factor at all? And is there a concern that female engineers are not staying or being retained in technical roles in comparison to males throughout industry? Spicy question, spicy question. So a bit about your journey and a bit about, is there any concerns related to women leaving technical roles?
Yeah, so the first part of the question, if I say what drove my decision to move from an engineering role to a non-technical role, I think my personal interest actually has always been sort of to branch out and to understand how a successful business runs. And so when I look career-wise, and go, what do I aspire to be? What do I want to accomplish? I think about all the things I need to learn, know how a company makes money, what makes it profitable, how just things get integrated, how things work. And so I knew very early on in my career that I did want to branch out. So for me, that was the reason I chose to take something else on, or to branch out after my initial roles in engineering. So about not feeling valued or represented, was that an aspect of it? I would say, honestly, for me, again, not really. Or I would say there were projects I was on that I felt that way sometimes, but it was not the driving reason, again, for why I chose not to, why I chose to broaden. I have felt sometimes in projects earlier in my career that, okay, that maybe I didn't feel that that I was being heard, or my ideas were being either listened or taken, listened to, or adequately either addressed, or sometimes, and I still see this happen sometimes, if you sit down and you observe in some meetings sometimes, and I think people are getting much better at this, is you say something, you have an idea, and time passes, and someone else says kind of the same thing, but repackaged. And it's, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. And you're thinking, well, that's kind of what I said like 10 minutes ago. So I have had that experience, not just when I was in engineering, right? So, yeah, if in answering your question, I would say, yeah, that was not the main driver for me, that I didn't feel valued or represented, but I felt for where I wanted, for my ambition, for my aspirations, I wanted to learn about how other parts of the company run.
Well, and I think that's so important, is that, women in engineering should not be pigeonholed into any one thing. So if you are someone who cares a lot about pursuing your technical path, power to you, go do that. Yeah. But equally, I would argue that engineering leadership is still engineering. Like there's no question about it. You need leaders within the field who understand what's going on, and it doesn't take away from, just because you're not the person doing the simulations doesn't mean you're not an engineer anymore. But
I can agree more.
Lori, do you have any feedback to add too?
No, I think Abby did awesome.
Fantastic, fantastic. All right, our next question is from Nicole. who is, get ready for this, it's a heart warmer. It says, I want to be a scientist when I grow up, and what should I do to work on that? From a 5th grade student.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks for the question. That's awesome that you want to be a scientist. I just think that's so cool. I mean, what should you work on? For me, engineering, I had a strong interest in the math and sciences. So hopefully you also have an interest in that. So math and science are important. You know, I was speaking to a friend of mine who was sharing recently that in school these days, and I think that's a great thing that's happening, they ask sometimes students to bring in those appliances that don't work and kind of open it and look inside and see what's broken. Maybe it can fix it. And I think that's so great that they're introducing more of that kind of stuff in the classroom. But it kind of goes back to Lori's point about being curious, right?
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully you enjoy the maths and the sciences, but be curious. How do things work? And if I'm not going to ask anyone to go into their parents' closet to take out appliances and, you know, unscrew it, but if there's something that's broken, if you have an interest and you ask, you know, maybe go in and look at, you know, how does this work? How is it put together? You know, there's magazines, there's shows, there's little clips. I think, you know, the little videos that are on the web that just teach you about a different subject. You know, watching some of those just can be quite interesting. Nature shows how engineering feats, how it's put together. I find this kind of things interesting and fascinating. So maybe that's, you know, something if you're interested in to look into as well.
And Nicole, I want to tell you thank you for asking the question. That is just incredible, because wow, the fact that you even asked the question is incredible. Thank you so much. And I also want to point out one thing, and it's something my mom used to always tell me. And so hopefully this helps, but I believe that anybody, especially you, because you took the energy and the initiative to ask the question, you can do anything you really focus in on, right? You have you have the initiative and the energy to ask the question. That is the curiosity part. And just as Abby said, there's so much out there now within your own city. We are working through different efforts that you might be able to, depending on what city you're in. We have things like the Oilfield Energy Center that send mobile office learning units across the country to teach people about the energy systems. Your city probably, or your local university may have career fairs or may even have science fairs. If you can get involved, and I do believe thanks to well, not thanks to the pandemic, but one silver lining from the pandemic is that there are now many things that folks can actually participate in virtually from your own home. So you don't even then need somebody to drive you to a location. So there should be a lot of resources out there, and keep asking those questions. And absolutely, if you want to be a scientist, read as much as you can and watch those math videos.
Thank you so much. We had to ask that question. Nicole, power to you, and we're so glad that you're here to join us. This next one is a little bit more challenging, but I have faith in you both. This one is about failure, which is always challenging to talk about, but critical. So it's about, have you ever failed in a role? We all have, so I'm sure you have a story, but a specific example of, you know, not done as well as you hoped for when you took the role, and specifically, how did you recover after you had a failure? How did you recover emotionally, your reputation? How did you get through the process? Lori, do you have one?
Yeah, and I do. I have lots of failures. However, the benefit of this question is actually I wasn't looking at the chat to see who asked, but the benefit of this question is whoever asked it's extremely insightful.
Mm-hmm.
As I think back on the 28 years that I've had with Shell, and hopefully more, I've learned and grown the most through failures. And let me just take an example of one. So through about the first 10 years I did just like Abby, first decade or so, buckled down and did only engineering and spent a lot of time delivering results safely and sustainably in a team environment, partnering with the right folks and to deliver results. Then the next few years I spent time leading teams. And then and the next, let's say 5 years after that, I spent time leading leaders, leading teams. But
Mm,
in one of my more recent roles where I stepped up a level, one of the things that it took a long time for me to figure out is doing work, leading people who do the work and leading leaders who do the work is different than being a strategic leader. And you have to actually back
mm,
out of the details and you have to back out and trust more. And it was a blind spot, right? Because what got me to here won't get me to there.
right.
And I have to honestly tell you, I literally, as I went through this little, it was a 3 month period where I think I woke up every morning almost in tears, if not in tears. When I went through that time period, it took a while for me to figure out everything that I'd been preaching to everybody else and helping and mentoring other folks on, which was try to learn from your mistakes.
Yeah,
At this point in time, I didn't even realize I had a mistake. And
right.
so I was very, very fortunate. And I'll put a plug in here on the screen without any mentioning any names. But I actually, at Shell, I work for a female vice president,
Hmm.
head of a huge, digitalization and innovation. And Abby works for a female vice president. And it just took one person just to sit down and say, okay, let's think through this. And Abby's supervisor actually just spent time with me and said, let's think through this. Where do we need to go? What do we need to get to? And helped me in the trough. And my learning out of that time period is you always have to be ready to take help. You always have to be
Yeah,
ready to say, I have blind spots. You always have to be ready to figure out how to improve. And the other learning through that time period is there is no end in learning in sight, right?
yeah.
And there is no end in changing in sight. And so if if I continue to say, okay, I want to be a strategic leader now, I have to continually say, okay, I need to forget what I know, go back to the basics. What do I need to learn? What do I think I know that I actually don't, right? And how can I take myself from where I am today to where I need to be tomorrow?
Mm,
But the failures are the places that I've grown.
yeah,
I think back to my career, and there are 3 or 4 times where, I can just remember what the room smelled like, what the lights looked like, what I was wearing, right? And those failures are when I took the biggest jumps in my career from because I've actually stepped back and learned. Takes a lot of humility and a lot of patience from really strong, and a supportive network.
that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that story, Lori. Story, Lori. I think it's one of those things that I think historically maybe we thought of failures as a bad thing, like always be perfect, always be great at everything and yada yada. And I really do think these days we've evolved as a society to think of failures as a benefit because you really identify what went wrong and you improve. Abby, do you also have a story to share?
Yeah, yeah. There are quite a few that come to mind. And again, I think um, the benefit of it is just always think about back to what have I learned from it and what will I do differently. One that comes to mind for me is a challenging project that I was on. And without going into the specifics of it, I think we had a goal in mind. And so um, I was leading the team and it was sort of just go, 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 do. And things were not lining up as I expected them to line up. And we're still in that mode of go, 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 do. And I think even it got to the point where it was actually impacting, I would say, even my personal life, right?
Mm,
So there's no work-life balance whatsoever. There were, I think I was partly in a mode of transitioning locations at the time. So I wasn't quite even settled on the home location, but I didn't want to share it, which was one thing I learned also at that time, because I think my boss probably would have been understanding to give me the space to also do that, because I just knew we were in this tricky spot. I so badly wanted this project to succeed. And so we just kept pushing at it. And it didn't quite work out the way I expected it to. What I learned was much earlier, we needed to have paused and step back.
Right.
And this is something I've learned when, it's just like a series, like it's not lining up, okay, stop, pause, what do we need to correct? So we may need to course correct. And that was hard for me to see in that moment, because I was so used to, when you have people know you as someone who delivers results. So you just so badly want to deliver results here, right? But it's just not lining up, it's not working out. You may need to course correct. And so that was a learning I took from that, and finally having the humility to say, okay, here's what we intend to do. Here's all the things we've tried. It has not panned out that way. We need to sit down, look at this again, and what's the different action? What are we going to do differently to get different results? So that's one example, and there's several more. But yeah, again, it's about what did you take away from that experience? What do you do with it? And I hope that helped me, or it has helped me, as I, go into other projects and as I lead people in that area.
100%. I think pausing is something people really take for granted and don't think about enough. This next question is about, it's for all the mothers in the room, or soon to be mothers. This is about, how many years do you feel that you spent building up your career and experience before having children? Do you think that there's a perfect time in your career to start a family? And I forget if I know at least one of you mentioned you have children. Do you both have children?
We both have children.
Okay, so you can both probably provide some insight into this then?
Yeah, so I don't think there's any perfect time. I think do what's right for yourself personally and for your family. I don't think you should, my personal feeling on it is that you should not be scheduling your work around when I want to have my family and so on. And some people might feel differently about it. And again, this is why I say we're all different, and the way we, how we might approach that. So again, do what feels right for you. I have friends who started with me almost 20 years ago, who are in the season of their life that they're about to be empty nesters, right? I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So I'm in a different season in my life. And that's fine. I have seen women in both areas do great career-wise. So I think it's all about how you manage things during that time. I think I mentioned during the video about lean on your support system, whether it's family around you, whether it's paid help. And women are really known for being really good at juggling multiple things, right? So I have faith in us that we can do it. So yeah, in answer to your question, I don't think there's a perfect time. I think what's right for you.
Laura, do you agree? What do you think?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I have, my children are literally 24 months apart. So there was a period in my life where, 4, 2, and 0, my husband had a business, still has a business. And I don't even know whether we were coming or we were going. And I've got quite a few funny stories about that. But the reality is, I think no matter what time or time period you go through, if I could look back and do things over again, like a do-over button, I think I would stress less about some things, right? So, and I would also reinforce and say, Lori, if I could look back at myself 20 years ago, you should have talked more. You should have asked for help more, right? And so if somebody's asking that question because you're coming in, you're graduating from college and you're coming into the work world, I mean, if I had one piece of advice, I don't think there's a perfect time. I think it's always a change in a way of living and a way of working, and it's a wonderful change with children. But talk, communicate, ask for help. Don't think you can do it all. Just like Abi said, right? Just ask for help and lean on your support network and communicate. The world is set up to help male and female, to help women and men out, and to raise children. And at least at Shell, we have a paternity leave, and it's just incredible. And so leverage the systems into whatever business you go into, leverage the benefits that exist, and step in. Hope that
Totally.
helps.
And I think that these days society is evolving to a point where we're viewing paternity leaves and maternity leaves, or stay-at-home parents, we're viewing these as jobs, because they are jobs. You are gaining skills, you are doing a lot of hard work. And I think that it's about that reframing of, you're not sure, maybe you're pausing on your exact career path, but you're doing something different that is still adding value, and you can't let that be forgotten. And I also, want to make space and acknowledge that there's folks out there who either can't have children or don't want to have children, and still struggle with that as well, within the scope of this family conversation, this very large topic. And I want to make sure that they're seen and heard too, because all of us are valued in this space, in this conversation. Next question is about advice to entry-level women who are already in STEM jobs that are looking for mentors. So mentorship has been a really big theme of this International Women's Day. And folks who are nervous to approach senior leaders, how should they go about that, whether it's senior level females or otherwise?
Yeah, so I remember for me in the beginning, this was also quite tricky. Just didn't quite feel natural to ask someone, can you be my mentor, please? Right? Just didn't. So my approach to it was sort of, if there's a woman I saw in a leadership role or in a senior role that I admired, I liked the way they came across in the meeting or how they addressed certain issues, you can schedule a get to know you. Right? Schedule get to know you, and it can be a coffee get to know you in the cafeteria, and just have a chat and just say, hey, this is me. This is my background. I just really loved what I heard about, when we're in this meeting, or how you handled the situation. And maybe it's an opportunity to share then some of the difficulties that maybe you've experienced, and what their advice might be. And it could be a follow-up. Do you mind if I follow up with you again in a few months, just to chat, because this is really helpful for me? And that could be something that starts up a relationship that clicks. And sometimes it clicks, sometimes it doesn't. So that may be one approach to take to start to engage someone, to see if they're a good mentor fit for you.
I love that. I love that. Get to know you session. Brilliant. Lori, what about you?
Yeah, I was going to say, for the students on the call, and if you're early into this, if you reach out and you ask, one of the things that you're doing as you do that is you're practicing being uncomfortable, right? So Abby had said on her video, why don't you, and I'll tell you, it's something I have to keep doing too, right? The way we grow is to step out, practice being uncomfortable, get comfortable with being uncomfortable at some level, be respectful, look for a good open slot on the calendars, book 2-3 weeks in advance, but really just step out and ask. And especially if you're actually stepping into the world, you don't only have to look into your own company, right? You can leverage folks like Vanessa and Do Goodery, and partner with some other organizations and look for folks outside of your company as well. I can honestly tell you, at least within Shell, everybody that I step out and ask a question to, they want to help, right?
Yeah.
And I know I've been trying my best in almost anything I do. And I learned this from a leader early on, which is, as I learn something new, bring someone along. If I get invited to something, bring someone along, right? And it doesn't, it could be anybody, but bring that person along. Let's start pulling people through this chain and help create that group of folks, and create that talent pipeline.
I love that. Yeah, get comfortable with being uncomfortable should be everybody's motto. It's so good. And I know for me, one thing I would recommend to entry-level folks sometimes people, I know I get a little overwhelmed sometimes the quantity of people who are asking for advice and mentorship. So sometimes it might be of value to just write out the situation you're in. If there's a specific thing I can help you with over email, or just a quick message, or I can take, 10 minutes whenever I have time to write you out a paragraph. That is a really helpful way if you're concerned someone might not have too much time on their calendar or something like that, is a completely different strategy to try as well. So we're going to wrap up on questions with one final one, and it's a nice inspirational one. And that is, what inspired you to become an engineer? I know for me, my story was related to, I didn't know what an engineer was. I knew of it vaguely, but for in grade 12, I was like, gotta decide a career. And I knew I liked calculus, I knew I liked chemistry, and it was some mentors in my life who were either in the engineering workforce or students, and they taught me about what it was, and I was kind of hooked from there and really fell into it. Honestly, I didn't have anyone in my family who was an engineer. I had very few supports growing up from that engineering STEM perspective, but my mom just always encouraged me to stay engaged in STEM, and she just said it would keep your options open, and she was very, very right. Mothers always know best. Now, what about the two of you? What's your journey?
I was telling Lori about this yesterday, actually, and I was like, I'm not sure if I'm going to share that one, but I will. I've always loved math and science. I have. But I was a huge Star Trek fan. As a kid, I really was. And I was the Captain Picard generation, right? And Trekkies know all about that, so we won't go there. But so that was first kind of like an introduction. Oh, wow, this is so cool, science. So actually, when I applied to college, I first thing I wanted to do was aeronautical engineering. And you mentioned earlier in the video that I also got a pilot's license because I've just really been into this thing about flying. But I love a good challenge, and I knew there were not a lot of women in engineering. Same thing with flying, and I'm going to that's for a second there to say that's also an area where we have very few women in.
Yeah.
Very few women, very few African American women. And I think it's a great space that I also encourage people to go in, as well as in engineering. And the reason I mentioned that is we were talking about maybe a little tidbit of history that's in here. Bessie Coleman in 1921 was the first African American woman to get a pilot's license.
Bessie Coleman, we'll remember that
1921.
name.
In 100 years, there's been less than 150 women, African American women, who have a pilot's license in the US. And that was a challenge, and one of the reasons I went and got my pilot's license, because I also found it exciting. I moved into chemical engineering specifically because I thought it, in terms of the areas that I could work in oil and gas industry, in manufacturing, and different things, I just thought it provided a lot of opportunities for me to do a lot of different things. And yeah, so again, interest area, just kind of linking that both together. So that was kind of like my story of looking for a nice or good challenge and saying, okay, here, I'm going to go for it. So yeah.
Well, thank you for increasing that much needed representation. What a staggering statistic, my goodness. And Lori, what about you?
Yeah, I was just doing the count for my son the other day. So I have an older son that's going to graduate in mechanical engineering, a middle son who's going into civil engineering, and a daughter who's going to start university next fall as a biomedical engineer.
Wow,
so,
what a family.
Yeah, well, we were just doing the count the other day, and I think we counted 20 engineers in about 2 or 3 generations in my family. So I'm going to honestly say, I don't know if I even thought of another field. I will tell you, much like Abby, I loved Hot Wheel cars growing up, and I love solving problems, right? And so for anybody on the line, if you are in grade school, high school, college, or in the industry, if you master the process of solving problems, complex ones, simple ones, if you can solve problems, you can go a long way, right? Because part of all of what we're here to do is to help others out. And the one thing that engineers contribute to this world is all in problem solving. So
100%.
just wanted to share that. Thank you for asking.
That is fantastic. Well, thank you both so much. This has been so insightful. I know I've learned so much. I would just encourage everyone in the audience to please stay connected with all three of us in whatever way you can, whether it's through our social medias, YouTube, all these things. And we have some exciting just next steps for you is that there's a feedback survey coming. If you want to follow this link, surveymonkey.com/r/persist March 10. We would love to hear your feedback on what you thought of this event. And we're not done. This is a long series going on throughout the year, and I will be joining the Q&A next time as well. So you can follow us on April 14th. You can go to bit.ly/persist April 14th to sign up. So thank you so much to Abi and Lori for your fantastic participation in this panel, and we'll wish everyone the best. Thank you.
Thank you.